rock bands have this weird incestuous type of thing where members from established bands would either quit, get fired, and join other bands, making for a strange collection of musicians. For example, the Misfits at one point had Robo and Diz Cadena from Black Flag, and the 1993-95 lineup of The Damned had members from the Godfathers and the New Model Army. In July of 1979, members of Sham 69 and the Sex Pistols formed one of punk's first supergroups. Lead singer Jimmy Pursey and bassist Dave Tregunna joined guitarist Steve Jones and drummer Paul Cook. They were referred to by fans and the music press as the Sham Pistols. Steve Jones and Paul Cook were still technically the Sex Pistols in the studio after the sacking of Johnny Rotten and when Sid Vicious left the group to pursue a solo career across the pond. The two wanted to continue as the Sex Pistols, but with a new lead singer and bassist. They even formed a supergroup of their own, joining Thin Lizzy as the Greedies, and performed around London, with Bob Geldof performing with them as a frontman on several different occasions. He was brought up as a new lead singer for Cook and Jones, but he was committed to the Boomtown Rats. Steve Dior, a friend of the Sex Pistols, who formed a backing band for Sid Vicious's touring during his stay in New York City, The Idols, which featured the rhythm section of the New York Dolls, bassist Killer Kane, and drummer Jerry Nolan, wanted to join Cook and Jones's new band, but bailed when he heard them that they were seriously considering Jimmy Pursey. Dior said, "When they started to consider Jimmy Pursey for the vocal spot, I decided to leave. At the time, we were called the Bollock Brothers." The original lineup of Sham 69 played their final show with guitarist Dave Parsons and drummer Mark Kane on June 29, 1979 at the Apollo Theatre in Glasgow, Scotland. They were joined on stage by Steve Jones and Paul Cook. They played Pretty Vacant, White Riot, If the Kids Were United, and What Have We Got? Paul Cook, in an interview with Sounds magazine, had this to say about Jimmy Pursey. "Jim is the only person who's come along who can get on with us. He's the same as us, see?" Jimmy Pursey was excited to work with Cook and Jones and told the writer for the New Music Express that they have recorded 10 songs, 7 originals and 3 cover versions, that they would be ready to tour by September that year. Among the songs the groups were planning to play live were Silly Thing, Lonely Boy, Submission, and Pretty Vacant from the Sex Pistols, and Joey's on the Street and If the Kids Are United. Jimmy wanted to call the band the Sex Pistols, but Steve Jones and Paul Cook had a change of heart and said no. He told the writer that, "Now I feel that the Pistols can be a band that have something to say. We're not digging up the name just to make money out of it like Virgin did with Vicious." Simon Draper, the managing director of Virgin Records at the time, whom Cook and Jones were still signed to, was quoted as saying to the Melody Maker that whoever joins Cook and Jones will be part of the Sex Pistols. The band Sham 69, even though they broke up, still owe their label, Polydor Records, 2 more studio albums, so Virgin and Polydor had to work out an arrangement for the 2 bands to work on a new album. The group, which was jokingly referred to as the Sham Pistols, went to Manor Studio in August to work on new songs. Only 2 were recorded, Natural Born Killer and Some Play Dirty. The lyrics were written by Jimmy Pursey and the music by Cook and Jones. This is about as far as the new quartet got before the whole project imploded. Paul Cook was the first to walk out of the studio saying, "It's worse than working with Johnny Rotten." Steve Jones regretted with working with Jimmy Pursey, saying, "We couldn't believe it when we met him. He was all mouth, and he cried, stuff like that. He's too emotional. All he wanted to do was be a Sex Pistol. We thought that we'd get a load of money for doing something that wasn't too bad. We could have made a load of money, but he just put off it. When me and Cookie gave Jimmy a try, it was never going to be the Sex Pistols in our mind. We always thought of it as a new group. The odd thing was that we liked him, but when we got together to try and work on some songs in the studio out in the country, he couldn't effing come up with anything. His cover was blown. He didn't have the talents or intelligence that Rotten did. Nowhere near it." Jimmy Pursey had this to say about his time with the Sham Pistols and the failed recording sessions. "It was absurd. the difference between us when we got into the studio. Then I knew it could never work out. After the failure of the Sham Pistols supergroup, Jimmy Pursey and Dave Tregunna would reform Sham 69. Steve Jones and Paul Cook would eventually get their own band, the power trio called the Professionals, with bassist Andy Allen, who worked in the studio uncredited on the Sex Pistols singles that were released to promote the film and the soundtrack The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. This band would eventually have their own issues, but that, my friends, is another story.